There was a plan, a carefully constructed, decades-long strategy to reshape the entire Middle East, to break Russia through Ukraine first, then turn the full weight of American power toward Iran, neutralize it, and lock the region into permanent Western control. That plan has collapsed, and what is rising from its ruins is something Washington never prepared for and still does not fully understand. What I'm going to walk you through today is not the version of events you will find on mainstream news channels. It is a strategic analysis of what is actually happening, the failure of American grand strategy, the accelerating rise of Iran as a genuine regional power, the fragility of the Gulf monarchies that Washington has staked its Middle Eastern position on, and the deeper global shift that all of this points toward. Some of what you are about to hear will be uncomfortable. Some of it challenges assumptions so deeply embedded in Western political culture that questioning them feels almost forbidden. But the facts on the ground do not care about political comfort. Let's go through this properly, from the top. To understand where we are, you need to understand where the strategy began. The blueprint was straightforward in its ambition: weaken Russia first, use Ukraine as the instrument, drain Russian military capacity, destabilize Russian society, fracture Russian political cohesion. Once Russia was sufficiently degraded, pivot to the Middle East with the full weight of Western economic and military power and complete the restructuring of the region that had been underway for 30 years. It did not work. Russia did not collapse, Ukraine did not deliver the decisive blow, and while the West was consumed by that conflict, Iran was not standing still. Iran was building, industrializing, modernizing, deepening alliances, and preparing for the confrontation that its leadership understood was eventually coming, regardless of any diplomatic arrangement. The strategists who designed this plan, both within American institutional power structures and among the globalist networks that operate across borders, made a fundamental error. They underestimated Iran. They looked at sanctions, at economic pressure, at the assassinations of military leaders, and they concluded that Iran was weakening, that it would fold when the moment came. They were wrong, and the consequences of that miscalculation are now unfolding in real time, not just in the Middle East, but in Washington itself, where political turmoil, institutional infighting, and a string of military setbacks are beginning to compound into something that looks less like a temporary difficulty and more like a structural unraveling. The story of modern Iran cannot be understood without understanding the 8-year war with Iraq in the 1980s. That war, devastating, brutal, fought with international backing for the Iraqi side, did something unexpected. It forced Iran to build. With no reliable external suppliers, with an economy under pressure, and a military facing an externally armed opponent, Iran had no choice but to develop its own industrial base, its own weapons production, its own scientific and engineering capacity. Out of that crucible came a generation of engineers, military planners, and industrial managers who understood self-reliance not as an ideology, but as a survival imperative. The education system expanded, the military-industrial sector deepened, and the institutional knowledge accumulated over decades of necessity became the foundation for everything Iran has built since. When Western analysts look at Iranian military capability today, the drone production, the missile systems, the air defense networks, they are looking at the product of 40 years of enforced self-sufficiency. This is not improvised. It is not the output of a desperate regime cobbling together garage technology. It is the result of a nation that learned, the hard way, that it could rely on no one but itself. The recent assassinations of Iranian military and political leaders, far from decapitating the government as their architects intended, have accelerated a governance transformation inside Iran. The moderates who sought accommodation with the West have lost influence. The factions that always argued negotiation under coercion was futile have been vindicated and empowered. Every targeted killing has strengthened the very forces it was designed to eliminate. Iran today does not negotiate from a position of fear. It negotiates, when it negotiates at all, from a position of strategic confidence, and increasingly it does not negotiate at all. Now let us talk about the foundations that American Middle Eastern strategy actually rests on, the Gulf monarchies, because this is where the strategic picture becomes most alarming for Washington. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and their neighbors project an image of wealth, stability, and modernity. Glass towers, sovereign wealth funds, Formula One circuits, World Cup stadiums. But beneath that image is a structural fragility that is almost without precedent in the modern world. These states import over 90% of their food. They depend on desalination technology for the majority of their fresh water, in some cases close to 60% of total supply. Their entire physical infrastructure was built not for a self-sustaining local population, but for the comfort and productivity of imported foreign specialists. Remove those specialists, cut the energy supply, disrupt the water systems, and the functional basis of these societies begins to dissolve within weeks. This is not speculation, it is engineering and logistics. Iranian strategic planners understand this precisely. The targeting doctrine that has been developed over years of preparation does not aim at full humanitarian catastrophe, it aims at functional viability. Strike the desalination plants, and you do not need to defeat the Gulf militaries in the field. You simply make the territories impossible to defend, impossible to govern, and politically untenable for the American forces stationed there. A U.S. military base in a country that cannot provide water to its own population is not a strategic asset. It is a liability with a target painted on it. The Gulf monarchies also lack something that Iran possesses in abundance, a deep-rooted state culture. These are relatively young political entities constructed around oil wealth and foreign security guarantees, rather than centuries of institutional development. Their populations have not been forged by the kind of shared historical experience that creates genuine national cohesion. Their leaderships depend on foreign mercenaries and foreign military umbrellas, rather than the loyalty of their own people. This is the foundation that American Middle Eastern strategy depends on, and it is far more fragile than Washington's public statements suggest. The United States approaches warfare in a specific way, shaped by decades of fighting opponents who were fundamentally weaker, less organized, and less motivated than American forces. That approach can be described as a kind of strategic overconfidence, the assumption that superior technology, superior firepower, and superior logistics translate automatically into victory against any opponent, in any context, under any conditions. Against Iran, that assumption is failing in real time. American bases across the region have taken damage. Missile defense systems that were supposed to provide impenetrable protection have proven penetrable. The supply chains that sustain American military operations, already strained by commitments elsewhere, are under continuous pressure from Houthi drone and missile campaigns in Yemen, from Iraqi militia harassment, and from the sheer geographic scale of the theater. Each Iranian drone that forces an American interceptor response represents a cost exchange that runs massively in Iran's favor. Tens of millions of dollars expended to stop a system that costs a fraction of that to produce. Scale that arithmetic across hundreds of engagements, and you begin to understand why American military stockpiles in the region are being depleted faster than they can be replenished. The deeper problem is cultural and institutional. The United States built its military power in a specific historical context, the Cold War, and then a period of unchallenged dominance against opponents who were either conventionally outmatched or strategically isolated. It never fully adapted to fighting a state actor that has spent 20 years studying American tactics specifically in order to defeat them. Iran did not prepare to match American power. It prepared to defeat American power through asymmetry, through attrition, through the exploitation of specific vulnerabilities that conventional military doctrine does not address well. And that preparation is showing.
Iran does not stand alone in this conflict, and the support it receives goes deeper than weapons transfers and diplomatic cover. Russia has provided Iran with advanced air defense systems, technology that has fundamentally changed the calculus of any strike against Iranian territory. The integration of Russian defense technology with Iranian military infrastructure represents a qualitative shift, not just a quantitative one. Chinese role is different but equally significant. Chinese radar systems, intelligence sharing, financial pathways that circumvent sanctions, and the broader diplomatic weight of Beijing's support, all of these have contributed to Iran's ability to sustain its position under pressure that would have broken a less supported state. There have been vulnerabilities. Some Chinese-supplied systems have shown weaknesses in combat conditions. The process of integrating foreign technology with domestically developed capabilities is not seamless. These are real limitations that Iranian military planners are working to address. But the trajectory is clear. The combination of Russian military technology, Chinese economic and intelligence support, and Iran's own deepening industrial capacity is producing a defensive and offensive capability that is qualitatively different from anything the region has seen before. Meanwhile, both Russia and Iran, despite years of Western sanctions designed to destroy their economies, remain dominant energy suppliers in a world that has not found credible alternatives. That energy leverage is not incidental to the conflict, it is central to it. The ability to sustain an economy under sanctions pressure while simultaneously maintaining military operations is something that very few states in history have managed. Iran is managing it. The multipolar world order that has been discussed in academic and policy circles for years is not approaching, it has arrived. The question now is what shape it takes and who pays the price of the transition. No analysis of American strategic failure in the Middle East is complete without looking at what is happening inside the United States itself, because the external and internal crises are not separate, they are feeding each other. The political landscape in Washington has become a theater of institutional conflict. Decisions are challenged, reversed, and challenged again. The coherence required to sustain a complex long-term military strategy abroad is increasingly absent at home. Different power centers within the American system are pulling in different directions, and the result is a foreign policy that oscillates between aggression and confusion. The migration crisis has become unmanageable, not merely as a policy problem, but as a symptom of a state that is losing its capacity to enforce its own decisions. The social tensions that were building for years have accelerated. The trust between ordinary Americans and their institutions, already eroded, is deteriorating further with every military failure, every economic squeeze, every gap between what the government says and what people can see with their own eyes.
Historically, states in this condition, overstretched militarily, politically fragmented, economically pressured, and facing a credibility crisis both domestically and internationally, do not successfully prosecute complex foreign wars. They look for exits, they look for ways to declare victory and withdraw, or they escalate in ways that create new crises rather than resolving existing ones. All three of those patterns are visible in American behavior right now. The world is watching, and the world is drawing conclusions. Underneath this conflict, beneath the military hardware and the energy politics and the proxy wars, there is a deeper contest that rarely gets named directly. It is a contest between two fundamentally different visions of how the world should be organized. The first vision is one of hierarchy, a single dominant power or a small group of powers that sets the rules for everyone else, that determines which governments are legitimate and which are not, that decides which populations deserve protection and which are acceptable collateral damage, that controls the financial systems through which all other economies must operate. This has been the operating model of the American-led international order since the end of the Cold War. And it is the model that is now breaking down, not because anyone has defeated it militarily, but because the contradictions within it have become unsustainable. The second vision is one of sovereignty, a world in which different nations with different histories, different cultures, different systems of governance coexist without any single power having the right to dictate terms to the others. A world in which regional powers manage regional affairs, and the diversity of human civilization is treated as a feature rather than a problem to be solved. Iran, whatever its internal contradictions and limitations, has positioned itself as a champion of the second model within its region. That is a significant part of why it commands the support it does, not just from Russia and China, but from populations across the global south who have their own long experience of what the first model looks like in practice. The resolution of this conflict will not merely determine the political future of the Middle East, it will set the terms for what kind of world order emerges from the transition we are living through. That is the scale of what is at stake. For the Gulf states, the window for a fundamental reassessment of the dependencies they have built is narrowing. States that rest their survival on foreign military protection and imported water are not stable states. The reckoning that has been deferred for decades through oil wealth is approaching. For nations that host American military bases, the question of what that presence actually costs in terms of sovereignty, security risk, and long-term strategic alignment deserves an honest answer. The Gulf states are demonstrating in real time what the answer looks like. For the rest of the world, the transition to a multipolar order creates both risks and opportunities. The risks are real. Transitions of this scale are historically dangerous, and miscalculation is always possible. But so are the opportunities for nations that have operated under the constraints of unipolar dominance to build genuinely independent foreign policies and genuine regional partnerships. And for ordinary people everywhere, the most important thing is to see what is actually happening, clearly and without the filters of official narratives. The gap between the story being told by governments and media institutions and the reality visible on the ground is larger right now than at almost any point in recent memory. Closing that gap, demanding honesty, supporting real analysis, refusing comfortable lies, is not just intellectually important. In a moment like this one, it is necessary. The plan failed. The strategy is unraveling, and the world that emerges from this will look fundamentally different from the one we have known. Understanding that, really understanding it, not just absorbing headlines, is what this channel is for. If this gave you something real, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more analysis that goes beyond the surface. And leave your comments and thoughts in the comments. Every one gets read.